Tiktuku Masoret HaMikra, Beshalah 5. The pasuk in the Shirah, right in the middle, Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, Mi kamocha nerdar ba'kodesh. Now, we discussed this point about a dagesh in the first letter of certain words which have the otiyot beged kefet, bet, gimel, dalid, kaf, pe, tav. For example, in the kaf of kamocha, usually you'd think that you put a dagesh kal, you'd have a dagesh there, you'd have a, for emphasis. But there's a rule that actually breaks the rule of beged kefet with the dagesh, and it's called the rule of ehevi. When you have a letter at the end of the preceding word that is either aleph, he, vav, yod, and then you have the kaf or anything from beged kefet, it nullifies, negates the rule of beged kefet, and there's no dagesh. It's rafeh. It's pronounced without a dagesh, like it's simple and soft. So therefore, based on the ehevi breaking the rule or nullifying the rule of beged kefet, we have in the beginning of that pasuk mi chamocha. The kaf is rafeh. It is not emphasized. There's no dagesh in the kaf. But on the other hand, in the second half of the pasuk, mi kamocha, you also have the yod from the word mi, which precedes the kaf of kamocha. So you'd think the same way with when you have any of the letters of ehevi before any letter in the following words, starting, for example, with a kaf from beged kefet, it wouldn't be a dagesh, but there's a dagesh in the second half. So we have one case follows the rule of removing the dagesh. The other case, somehow, the rule is not, that rule is negated too, and there's a dagesh in the kaf. The question is why. It's a special situation. The Bet Yosef, the Minhat Shai brings down that there are two particular reasons, potentially, why the second mi kamocha has a dagesh. It probably shouldn't, but according to the Dikduk, but it does. So he brings down two reasons. The first one is cited in the Bet Yosef in the name of the Orhot Hayim, who is the Rishon, and it is in the Bet Yosef of Ora Hayim, Siman Nun Aleph. And he writes there in the name of the Orhot Hayim, Yizaher lomar mi kamocha ne'dar ba'kodesh bekaf tegusha. He says you should be careful, apparently something very significant, be very careful to say mi kamocha ne'dar ba'kodesh, the second half of the pasuk. And the first half, mi kamocha, the way it normally should be. But the second half should have a dagesh in it. And he explains why. Shem lochen nimtza meharef. He says, if you don't say that and you make it a soft kaf, not mi kamocha, but you again make it mi chamocha, there's a potential that you might say something blasphemous. I mean, that's pretty serious. And he points out, he says, Ke'omer Hashem micha. Now, the words mi chamocha, the beginning, mi chamocha ba'alim Hashem, a rhetorical question. Who is like you? Who is as great as you amongst all the other gods in the world, except HaKadosh Baruch Hu? No one. But if you say micha afterwards, micha mocha, there's a potential you might say micha could be equal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has v'shalom. He could be a meharef if he says that. He could be a blasphemous person if he equates somebody else with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who is micha? So there's a midrash that about this person Micha, who was not such a great person. When Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to take out the bones with the Aron of Yosef Tzaddik, Yosef told Bnei Yisrael, he told his brothers, he said, Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem, when God takes you out from Egypt, then you should take my bones also. Take atzmotai mizeh, remove them from here. So the question is, what happened? The bones of and the Aron of Yosef, who was, of course, a mighty ruler in Egypt, the Egyptians, they wanted to preserve it, make sure nobody played around with it. So therefore, one of the opinions is, they put the Aron, they sunk it in the sea, in the Nile, Banilos. And it went all the way down to the bottom of the Nile. So here Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he says, Yosef commanded us to remove, take my bones out. But meanwhile, they're in the Nile. How do I do it? He had to do it be'ofen nes. He had to do it with a nes. So he took a piece of metal. He wrote on it Shem Hashem, presumably maybe 72 letters, the full name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which has certain power. And then he wrote also the words Ale Shor. Shin Vav Resh Ale Shor. Why Ale Shor? That the shor, the ox, should rise. Because Yaakov Avinu, when he gave the beracha to Yosef, he said, Banot Sa'ada Ale Shur. That he used the term Ale Shur, not exactly the same thing, interpretation, but those words were there. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu used it in a similar remez. He said, Ale Shor, the ox, you were called an ox by Yaakov Avinu, a shor, Ale Shor, come up. And now also we know, by the way, at the end, in Zot HaBeracha, there, Moshe Rabbeinu does refer to Yosef HaTzadik as a shor. There it is. It's specifically referred to that way. So when he put this piece of metal, he threw this piece of metal in the Nilos, in the Nile, and it said Ale Shor, the Aron came up. It went and it elevated, and he was able to take it out. So what happened? Micha was watching this whole wonderful, magical miracle from Moshe Rabbeinu to get the Aron. And Moshe Rabbeinu left it there, that piece of metal with the name, with the Kadosh Baruch Hu's name, because it has power, and the Ale Shor. He took it with him. When Bnei Israel then rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they wanted to build some kind of an idol, and Aaron said, Hipvait Pareku, give me everything, all your nizamim, all your jewelry, all your gold and silver and everything, and we're gonna do something with it. Aaron was stalling. So Micha, he's a pretty wise guy, he takes the piece of metal and he throws it in the pile. And this piece of metal said, Ale Shor, what happened? An egel came up, a young calf, which is, of course, the form of a shor, all of a sudden arose because of that particular miraculous piece of metal that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name on it. So therefore, the Beit Yosef says, according to the Har Chaim, you have to be very careful not to say, in the second Mikamocha, you have to say Mikamocha, so it shouldn't sound like Mikamocha ba'elim Hashem, Micha. And God forbid, that's blasphemous, you shouldn't say it. Minhachai also brings down a different type of answer, which for this particular dagesh in the second half of the pasuk, which has nothing to do with blasphemy, but he says the following. It's written in Midrash Lekach Tov on the Torah, and he cites it. The first one is Rafeh, the second one is with the dagesh. Why? Because in the beginning, Bnei Israel, when they started to sing the Shirah, they didn't quite get into it fully, so they sang it softly and nicely. But in the end, when they were really inspired and they felt the full hargasha, the full power and feeling of the Shirah and the miracle that was done, and there was hitlahavut, then all of a sudden they sang it befem maleh, with a full mouth. In other words, they really, really blasted it out. So therefore he says, you put the dagesh in there. This first one was kind of soft in the beginning, but it ended up b'fem maleh, and it was very strong. So it's not a reason of blasphemy, but it is a reason that the dagesh is there. Now, because of the possibility that the reason is not to have a blasphemous notion mentioned, one has to be very careful to put the dagesh in Mi Kamocha, the second one, Mi Kamocha Neda Bakodesh, just in case that really is the real reason.